Welcome to this conversation. It's an opportunity for all of us to start to explore uncertainty and fear and how it is creating anxiety, an existential anxiety that is alive in our midst right now. Before I go deeper, I want to introduce myself. My name is Annie Browning, and I want to note that I am recording this conversation in a very podcast style, but from my back porch. And I live on a farm in central Virginia, and I'm intentionally recording it outside because my hope is that you may hear the birds in the background. You may actually hear a cow mooing, or the pack of goats that roams on our land, or even our dog that is whining to come in. It's early in the morning, and my children are in the background, and my husband is making breakfast. And I'm intentionally recording this now because this is real life. Real life is not in a sound booth where most of these conversations are recorded. Real life is messy, and it's not always convenient. I can't promise that there will not be interruptions. And the purpose or intent of recording this now is so that you feel comfortable, even invited, to listen to my words in the midst of your everyday. It does not need to be set apart and sacred. Instead, this important conversation that we're having that is really around how we stay conscious in uncertainty and fear resulting in anxiety is essential and pivotal. And it's important that we learn how to stay secure and solid and located within ourselves in the midst of going about our normal daily business. In my humble opinion, times of meditation and prayer have become far too sanctified. And we have an illusion that it's about being in a Zen state of calm. Instead, at the core, living into a meditative state, a deep state of being, is meant to be embodied in the everyday. And it's not always comfortable and calm and still. Rather, it's a way that we are in the world. And that is what is so key. So before I go too deep in the content for today, I want to start with a story. And the power of story is that it connects us. And my story is your story, our story. And what I here to share with you from my heart today is about 3 years ago, many of you know that our eldest son was hit by a car and passed away in the presence of our family. And while that is perhaps difficult to hear, that's the actual point of today's conversation, because we are invited to engage with difficulty in a way. And what happened after his death was, it was traumatic and it was raw and it was painful, but it resulted in 3 very sudden changes. First of all, our health started to change dramatically, of course due to stress and trauma, and suddenly we all were developing chronic illnesses. Second, we moved very suddenly, and we moved across the country from one community to a community that felt very foreign to us. And third, our jobs, our sense of security and financial stability started to shake and rock because we were no longer able to show up in the same way. Now, these are all adverse circumstances, and I am guessing that some of you, most of you, I'm going to say all of us, have encountered these sort of challenges before, whether it be a change in a job, a move, or something has shifted in our health and our relationships. And I hope you've experienced them, because that's what it means to be alive. That's what it means to be human. And what I noticed the most in this time was that I would have people come up to me, well-meaning, wholehearted, good-souled people, and they would ask me, kind of reflect to me, I don't know how you're okay. I would not be okay. You seem okay. How is it that you're okay? And I would sort of have this quizzical response of, I have no idea how you think I'm okay. Everything inside of me is crumbling and falling apart. My world has shattered. I am not okay. What they were picking up on, though, is a sense of okayness on the inside and a resilience, an ability, an innate capacity to stand and be solid and steady in the midst of uncertainty and rapid change. And I want to say very clearly that this is a state I am holding even though everything in me feels like it might be falling apart. And you have this ability as well. You do. All of us do. And the passion you hear in my voice is it's time for us to reclaim that steady, solid resilience. The fact that others would reflect to me that they didn't know how they would be able to have a similar response in adverse circumstances or life events rang a bell for me, a curiosity that what is it in our culture, our system right now, even in our collective psyche, that thinks that we can't handle difficult things, that we don't have the capacity to be present in the midst of pain and challenge. And I'm here to say that we do. We do. And that's really what today's conversation is all about. So let's start together by unpacking really how we got here, looking at history, but also digging deeply within our own consciousness to notice how we have changed and shifted even over the past few years in response to what's happening right now in the world and in our own lives. And also at the end of this sequence, I'm going to actually share with you this upcoming opportunity of how you can join a free webinar, 3 conscious strategies for 3 levels of transformation that creates lasting stability and overwhelming change. So know that you will be invited to join this upcoming free webinar because that's where we'll really go deeper and deeper together. The goal here is that we actually start to override some of our deeply innate patterns in how we are responding to uncertainty, to increase our capacity for tolerance of what is uncomfortable, but also to start to access a consciousness that is built upon resilience. And all of us have this ability. When we look at where we are right now, there is perhaps a couple key factors that are influencing our intolerance for anything that is uncertain. There is what we would call a psychological fragility that is occurring right now, and I want to reference some of the work of Jonathan Haidt, especially his work of the coddling of the American mind. In terms of our own resilience is essentially being broken down in 3 particular ways. First of all, there is an invitation, and I think of my own upbringing and even how perhaps I was instructed along the way to always trust your feelings. And often we mistake our emotional responses for objective reality, which creates a dissonance. There is an increased sense of us versus them thinking, and we see that happening right now, especially in our larger context, that in response to complex uncertainty, things that we can't button down and nail to the ground, we have this polarizing response that comes down to us and them. And then there's a concept of idea fragility, that we treat challenging perspectives as existential threats. So if we look at our own intolerance of uncertainty that's feeding anxiety, let's come at it more from a heart or consciousness perspective. At the root, all of us have the same desire at a very core level. It's for safety, it's to be loved, for acceptance, a general yearning for well-being and wholeness. And that is fairly universal, although it appears, of course, in a variety of different ways, depending on our own context. We are not cookie-cutter experiences of one another. When we look at the idea of really becoming resilient from a consciousness perspective, it's this way of knowing that all is well, and it's what is a sense of okayness on the inside, even when external circumstances look like they are falling away and falling apart. And I want to give my bias here, my perspective, that a lot of spiritual practices have become very sanitized. In other words, we have this idea that meditation is nice and that engaging in spiritual practice or any sort of consciousness expansion will make us feel better. And while all of us want to feel better, at the root of consciousness expansion is a disruption and a willingness to start to seek the edge of what is comfortable. True consciousness expansion does not bypass discomfort or that knowing on the inside that there is unconsciousness within us that is ready to come forward. So if we go back to this idea of kind of what's led us to here, the idea of always trusting our feelings instead of objective reality, or an us versus them, or an idea fragility, when we are in an expanded consciousness, this is where there is a dividing or a bifurcation of just what is feeling and emotion versus what is an emergent reality that we are leaning into. The idea of us versus them thinking starts to fall away because we enter a state of interconnection with everyone and everything. And our ideas, that idea of noetic clarity that comes forward in expanded states, can start to shift dramatically. In other words, it dissolves our illusions. And this is essential. It is absolutely needed right now, especially in this moment in our world and in our personal lives, to start to shatter some of the illusions that we have bought into, to begin to lean into a new reality, to dissolve us versus them, to sharpen our ideas so that they are not complacent or being validated by our external circumstances. And in a moment, kind of in this next micro episode, I want to talk a bit about what it actually means to start to work at 3 very distinct levels when we encounter uncertainty. And because we often lean toward one level, right? It's kind of working with our personal stuff, which has to happen. Because we don't work at 3 levels, then the uncertainty and fear and anxiety tends to persist. Because we've essentially dealt with or transformed on one layer, and as we enter a new paradigm right now, we are called to start to transform on 3 layers so that the level of transformation is more comprehensive and complete. I've already mentioned just before we transition here that there is a more conscious way to start to work at those triggers of uncertainty. And this is where we're going to go from here. Into, we've set the stage, we've sort of noticed how we've gotten to the place we are, and now we're going to shift into talking about what do we actually do from here to build resilience.